Right, okay, so shall we get started? Because Liam's not feeling very well, I've got to manage the introductions. Can you believe it? So I'm going to start off with myself. I'm Joanna, I'm part of the Rail Innovation Group. I'm going to go to Nik first, Nik Lusardi, who's our speaker for today. So if everyone can just introduce themselves and where they are at this present time.
Hi everybody, I'm Nik Lusardi, obviously going to be speaking today to share some insights or some anecdotes from my previous career in working for Virgin Atlantic. I'm now a consultant, but previous to that I was working at HS2, so nice to meet you all. And
where are you?
I'm in Surrey, in Red Hill.
So Adam?
So yeah, I'm Adam. I'm currently working from home, doing various bits and bobs, working with other graduates at the moment, doing anything where others having to self-isolate, and I'm currently in Loughborough.
So furthest north we've got so far. Chris Jones. You're on mute.
Chris Jones, I work for the DFT at the minute, leading commercial strategy and technical integration on one of the Heathrow rail projects. Currently in my friend's flat in Wapping because I'm not allowed back to my own flat yet.
Wayne?
Hi, Wayne Marks Butler, CCD Design and Ergonomics, and I'm sitting in my kitchen in sunny Hertfordshire.
And Emily?
Emily, I'm from One Big Circle. We do intelligent video, and we're currently trying to get our video capability onto trains and to help them in this critical times. And I'm in just outside Bristol, just south of Bristol. Someone's got some beautiful birdsong in the background.
I don't know who it is. I've got birdsong, but I don't think it's me.
No, it's not. Yeah. I have to leave at 12:30. That's all. So apologies for having to jump off.
Dave Sampson.
Sorry, I was muted then. I run a consultancy deploying advanced technology in the transport industry around buses, but also looking at the opportunity in trains as well.
Liam?
Hi, I'm Liam. I'd normally be helping more, but I'm about to start coughing fit again, so I'm in London.
Sorry, is it Sardia? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah. So I'm in London. I'm a consultant. Up until just the other week, I was leading innovation at Avanti West Coast. So now doing some smaller pieces of work.
We've got Phil.
Hiya. So Phil Facey from Deeper Than Blue. So we de-risk software implementation for businesses, and I'm in Manchester.
Mill Williams.
Yeah, I'm in Chester. Business is located in Liverpool. We capture evidence and validate intuition, so it helps with decision making.
And where are you?
Chester.
In Manchester. Chester.
No, I'm in Chester at the moment, but my business is located in Liverpool.
Anna?
Hi, sorry, I think I wasn't on mute earlier, so hopefully you didn't hear what was going on in the background. I'm a business development manager for Hitachi, working from home with 2 little children, so you may have heard them screaming, running around in the background, but they're outside now.
I think we can only see the station.
So you can only see the station, it's even better if you get closer. I'm not at my station, but this is my lovely background. This is my station.
Stephen Pilkington.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen. I'm a senior project engineer for TTG Technology. I'm based just outside Edinburgh, and we do driver advisory systems for trains across the UK and Europe.
Oh, somebody from Scotland. That sounds exotic, doesn't it?
Well, maybe not for temperature, no.
Tammy Doyle. You're on mute.
Hi, I'm based on the Wirral. I'm currently not really on lockdown at the moment because I'm out volunteering, but I actually work in events. That's my background.
Paul Coleman. Hey, Paul.
Good afternoon. Paul Coleman, Transport Consultant for CACI. We are a software development company in the rail sector using data from various parties, and I am based in Guildford in Surrey.
Peter Hicks, sorry.
Nearly. Hi, Peter Hicks, Director at Open Train Times and Railway Systems Consultant based in, I was going to say sunny North London, but it's not terribly sunny at the moment.
Yeah, it's a bit cloudy today, isn't it? Julian.
Yeah, Julian Schwarzenbach from Data and Process Advantage, based up in Lichfield, just northeast of Birmingham. And day job is very much around data management, data exploitation, asset management. So currently in the process of converting our physical courses into online training courses.
Gina, good to see you.
Hi, how are you?
Good,
I've been meaning to join one of your events, and I figured this would be my first event. So I am Gina Mock, and I run a professional network for learning and education.
Magdalena?
Hi, my name is Magdalena. I'm working as a train commercial guard for Southwestern Railway. I'm at the break at the moment, so I'm interested in health and safety and development of apps for...
And you managed to get back from Poland?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Well done. Good to see you.
Yeah, 22 hours in the bus. So yeah, but happy to be back. Thank you.
Ning How? Is that correct?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ning. Yeah, I'm based in London. I work for a tech startup called Just Park. We supply parking and mobility solutions to local authorities and private operators.
Thank you. Eric?
Oh, hi. Yep, I'm Eric. I work at Wild Networks. We're a startup as well, tech startup. We do connectivity for the Internet of Things. And I'm currently in lockdown in a one-bedroom flat in central London.
Oh, poor you. Sadian. You're on mute. No. Olivier? You're on mute as well. No. Tried to get everyone to introduce it. Paul Taylor.
Hi there, Paul Taylor, Account Director at an organisation called SES, provides software continuity solutions, software testing, and work quite extensively in the rail industry, predominantly with Network Rail and subcontractors for their software estate. So hopefully get some great insights from you guys on the event today. Thank you.
So we've got two Craig, so I'm going to go with Craig Sapio first, I think it is.
Yeah, Sapio.
Sapio, hi.
Hi, so Craig Sapio from the Energy Innovation Centre, so a not-for-profit company that works on behalf of the electricity and gas distribution networks, working on innovation for them. And we were recently commissioned by Network Rail to do a project with our electricity partners to understand how they could better improve their electricity network. So just learning more about how innovation in the rail industry works to help benefit that. And I'm currently at home in Chester.
Another two people from Chester. Tom McLaughlin, is it?
Working at the West Coast Partnership franchise.
Nick G.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick. I work at the National Railway Museum in York, and I'm currently at home quite close to the museum in York also.
Hi, Nick.
Hi.
Matthew Drury.
Oh yeah, I've got a few webcam issues, and she just had to listen to my voice. I work for Saturn Communications. We provide digital signage solutions for railway stations and train operating companies. and I'm at home in West Yorkshire near Huddersfield.
Raj?
Hi there, good afternoon everyone. Raj Sachdeva, run a consultancy business, Black Box. We work with travel management companies, train operating companies, and a few techie startups in the travel arena. So hi.
I haven't got a name for this one, it's just got Hex Young R. So this is a surprise.
I'm sorry to let you down. It's Richard Young here from Heathrow Express. I work in the commercial team at Heathrow, looking at our B2B partners and third-party retailers. And yeah, I'm dialing in from just outside of Guildford today.
Mita?
Hello, I'll put the video on. Hopefully my bedroom's not too messy. I work for a company called Apinster. We build mobile applications for rail and aviation, which help with efficiency. Clients include Avanti, West Coast, Bombardier, Emirates.
Sven? Can't hear you. No. Let's go to John B.
Press some buttons on here. Hello, my name's John. I work for East West Rail. We're building a railway between Oxford and Cambridge, and I am sitting just outside Oxford at the moment in the beautiful countryside.
Excellent, welcome. Dan. No. Craig Tompkins.
Hello, my name is Craig. I'm head of transport for a small design, strategic design consultancy, DKNA, and I love hearing Nik Lusardi stories.
Hi Craig, and I know I owe you a response on your email. I haven't forgotten. And I've got two finally. Sula. Is that right?
Yeah, hi, it's Sahel, sorry.
Sahel, sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. It's just the way it's set up on the system. So currently working for Network Rail, been a contract with NR for the last 10 to 12 years working on digital rail and a number of other innovation projects. Been part of the Rail Innovation group for the last couple of years. So I'm looking forward to meeting everyone and talking about all our wonderful ideas. And I'll try to fix the camera if I can, I'm not sure how.
And I noticed that Deb snuck in halfway through the call as we were going through.
I did. Hello everybody, my name's Deb. I'm part of the Rail Innovation Group, and also I work for High Speed Rail Group and a few other transport related people. I've muted I've not got my video on at the moment because it keeps going weird, but I'll put it back on in a minute.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. So hope you find this interesting, but I'm going to hand over to Nik, who hopefully the technology will work and be able to share his screen because he's got a couple of slides as well. But the idea is that we stimulate the debate, and if you want to ask a question, or you can either do it through the chat, which I will monitor, or you can just put your hand up, figuratively speaking. Just to let you also know that we record the presentation so that we send it out to everybody at the end of it if you want to recap on some of the things that were said, and also we share it on social media as well. So enjoy.
So no swearing then?
Well, you can if you mute yourself.
Right, 1 second. I'm just bringing up my screen now. Can everybody see that? Has that come up yet?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So I should say my connection to Joanna was also that I worked with Joanna at HS2 for 3.5 years as the head of customer experience. So Joanna and I worked quite closely. So that's my link to rail. I forgot to say that earlier on, although I'm talking about my previous experience at aviation. I spent about 12.5 years working for Virgin Atlantic. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of give you a couple of anecdotes, really, some hopefully would inspire people in this challenging times that we find ourselves in at the moment with regard to Corona and lockdown. Everybody's kind of hunkering down and kind of squirreling away any assets that they have and making sure that they can then come out of this unscathed. But Virgin Atlantic was kind of a pioneering brand that was set up by Richard Branson in the 80s, because there was no competition to BA, and he basically chartered a plane. I don't know if anybody knows this, but he chartered a plane, and that's how he couldn't get back and got bumped off a BA flight. So he chartered a plane and brought everybody back from New York, and that's how the company started. Richard himself, let me just present that better. So he was famously, sorry to kind of to break in there with a semi-naked picture of Richard Branson, but he famously he quoted that if it ain't broke, break it, and that was his kind of methodology, and that for a long time actually translated through all of the work that was done at Virgin Atlantic. Oh, there's no image there, sorry, there we go. So I'm going to go back right to 1995, and the J2000 product was a kind of revolutionary lie flat business class seat that was conceived. It took 4 years to kind of bring to market, and it was the market leader for a very short space of time, because it was then heavily copied. So Virgin Atlantic in 2001 or early 2000 kind of started to develop, think about what was the kind of the copy, or sorry, what was the next incarnation of this, and thinking about how can they get market share. So they started to think about what is the new business class model. Unfortunately, 9/11 happened in 2001, which basically decimated the aviation industry, in particular decimated the transatlantic route across to the US, which was basically most of its kind of main kind of revenue stream at the time. They were very competitive in that area. So the idea that they were working on, the thing I wanted to share with you was the incarnation of this new upper class suite. And instead, the interesting thing with Virgin Atlantic was, instead of hunkering down, as I said, and stopping the non-essential spend as we see today in the world that we live in, the actual Virgin management increased the actual capacity to develop, and they set up what I would term as a crack commando team to actually continue developing the new product and innovating in a time when it was very, very challenging, because nobody wanted to spend any money, and in particular the aviation industry hadn't been hit with such a sledgehammer as it had then. What transpired was they created a team, and I worked with a number of these individuals, because when I was at Virgin Atlantic, because I actually arrived afterwards, and they set up a very close-knit team. They had a locked area, which only specific people had access to. It was a very competitive time as well for the aviation world, but they continued to kind of charge on ahead. And if any of you know how difficult it is to actually develop a seat, they managed to actually, and to certify it for an aircraft, which it eventually it started flying on the 747-400. It was launched in 2002. Which was groundbreaking, really. They really kind of, and also not only that, it was a really innovative product. In fact, that it had gone from what was quite a ubiquitous kind of product, which was the J2000, is something that the aviation world had never seen before. Equally, some of the innovation that was in this was that you could actually take off and land whilst you were in recline, and also there was a separate bed surface to the actual seat surface. What would transpire from that is, as soon as this hit the market, there was an immediate positive impact to the company's profit, and the market share on their transatlantic routes increased massively as well. And they got the jump on their on the biggest competitor they have, namely the one in blue. And this was kind of really what it demonstrated is that they took a chance to innovate in times of adversity, but actually it paid off massively, because as soon as whilst the sleeping giants all kind of came out from their slumber, Virgin Atlantic was already kind of accelerating past them, and actually they stole a lot of market share on the transatlantic routes because of it. So it's a fantastic kind of story. It's something that I learned about only after I joined Virgin Atlantic in June 2004, and I joined the design team there. And it's something that I kind of reflect on massively, because I walked into a company that was extremely buoyant. After launching that product, I was actually riding the wave of that innovation, and it was a really exciting time. And I joined there actually I was employed as a senior designer at the time of my first job there, to actually work on their A380. So they're already invested in new aircraft 2 years after launching this new product. From that point, as I worked there for 12 and a half years, I said. In 2007, I was then tasked with the challenge of developing the next upper class suite for the Virgin 787 Dreamliners were going to arrive from Boeing. So this is the second story, but I kind of wanted to kind of show you a timeline really of how innovation can kind of, it kind of breeds positively within an organization. Started the actual project itself. It was obviously in some ways at the time, I look back at it now and thought that was quite a big deal, because actually they were quite big shoes to fill, but the company wanted to move forward again and wanted to innovate and generally to develop seating and cabins of this nature. It takes between 3 to 5 years on average if you're starting from scratch. So there was 3 years of development that I kind of went through from a seating perspective. I led this piece of work and eventually ended up with, this was named Project Yuri, named because of actually I managed to kind of create more space for customers and actually more seats as well. So it was named after Yuri Gagarin, because the first man in space. And you can see here there was like 3 years of kind of hard graft to kind of get to this. These are some of the models right from the start. Started with cardboard models right the way through to a fully one-to-one scale cabin that we then took people through, and the execs, etc., to try to drive through this new product innovation. The hardship came, and this is the second story really. The hardship came from the fact we had two major challenges that we encountered in 2010. One was that Boeing announced major delay to the 787 Dreamliners, and we developed this seat specifically for that aircraft. So it was all kind of that 3 years of work was all about that one aircraft. And the second one was that actually Virgin Atlantic, through some commercial problems, didn't have a seat manufacturer that could actually build the seat. So they already invested millions of pounds in this development. They didn't have an aircraft and they didn't have a seat manufacturer. So the solutions that actually, and this goes back to that point around where this all started around, if it ain't broke, break it, but also this kind of intent to actually innovate in times of hardship. This could have been quite easily, let's pause this until we get some more information around the actual, the aircraft from Boeing. But instead of that, Virgin decided to actually order new aircraft from Airbus. So they paused, they created a kind of they needed that to actually fulfill the slots to actually progress and to drive profit into the organization. Off the back of that, I then had to redesign the seat to fit a smaller aircraft, because the A330 was a smaller aircraft, a smaller fuselage. So that happened. The second one was that there were no seat manufacturers because there was some legal things being contested at the time from copyright infringement, etc. So Virgin Atlantic actually created its own seat manufacturer. And it took them 6 months to do that, and they set that up. And there were 50 people working on developing and designing this and certifying this seat for these aircraft. Eventually, in 2012, the seat was launched, and actually it was then placed onto the A330s. And this was the actual, it was an award-winning seat, such as the previous seat as well. So the upper class suite that had gone before was multi-award winning, and so was this as well. But it was a very slightly different aesthetic, as you can see from the original, more modern, and but still kind of served the purpose and had the same kind of key attributes the original product. The one thing I kind of wanted to kind of finish on really, and then we can kind of open up and have some more discussions about some of the kind of the finer details, if you like. But I think really the thing that I learned in my time at Virgin Atlantic was that really the intent to innovate in adversity actually has to start from the top. And I know that sounds like a cliche thing, but it's absolutely true. But the fundamental thing is that it has to be owned by everybody who is actually a part of that. And this is epitomized really by the brand idea that Virgin had along this whole process. They developed this idea that actually they realized within the company and the company culture was that actually the whole company had everyday pioneers, and this was their brand. And these are the to the right and underneath, the everyday pioneers. You can see then the principles that were led by the organization, and that enabled them. And I've just given you two examples really of some innovation, but there's a huge array of other kind of examples that I could provide you. but obviously we don't have time today. There is one final thought as well, and I did reflect on my time at Virgin Atlantic, and the one thing that I always remember was that we always found a way to have fun when we were developing this, and I think that's the key thing to innovation as well. Again, I know it sounds a kind of a bit of a throwaway comment, but it was absolutely true. There was a lot of fun there, and actually that brought everybody together and coalesced them around the kind of single point, which was actually to develop something that was going to which was a game changer. So there we go.
Thank you, Nick. That was really interesting. I just to get the conversation going, I was wondering, in terms of your reflection, because I know you mentioned about the time of designing the seat after 9/11, and also when you came on board and were designing the next phase of that was obviously at the start of the financial crisis, which obviously was also quite a difficult time for the airline industry.
Yeah.
But I think probably what is going on now pales into insignificance in terms of what 9/11 and the financial crisis meant, because pretty much, I mean, like, most airlines fleets are pretty much grounded, and there is no end to this, is there? So what would your thoughts be on how different this crisis is and how we manage that?
Yeah, I think it's very, in some ways, it's what happened with 9/11 was a kind of smaller version of where we are right now, so that everybody kind of locked down. The aviation world, especially the transatlantic route, stopped, and that was the main source of income for Virgin Atlantic at the time. But I think what you have to do as well is there's a kind of key learning from Virgin Atlantic is they used the resource that they had available to them at the time to drive innovation. So it's looking within and saying, well, and that's what they did by setting up a company. So set up this crack commando team within Virgin. And as I said, I worked with a lot of these people when I first started there. Really, they're just really, really kind of ambitious people, but wanted to kind of make change. With everybody was singing from the same hymn sheet. So I think it's about using the resources available to you and looking for those kind of, I guess, those innovative ideas from within, rather than searching for the silver bullet. But there may be something within, and trying to kind of understand what it is you actually have, because there is time now to actually think. And I know that there's time to take stock of what a direction is different. All of us are taking stock of the different directions that we've been going in, whether it's personal or kind of corporate. But I think you can look within and go, actually, you can start to see where there is quality that you can kind of start to innovate on top of something else, or bring ideas together, look for inspiration from outside your industries as well. I mean, we see a lot of that now. We see where, we've got Dyson and also McLaren are all getting involved in respirators. And they're actually, the key thing there is they're taking what they're good at and actually repurposing it to develop something new.
That's a really interesting point. Can I come in there, Johanna? It's Deb Carson.
I'm just going to ask Nick to stop sharing his screen so we can start seeing some people. If you want to do something, then I want to bring in Julian, because that kind of leads on to Nick's point as well.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, Nick, for a really interesting presentation. And I think that last point that you made there about, innovation is not just about kind of looking at very sort of technical fixes, I suppose. It's also about looking at how people work and culture change, and how industries share things into sort of sector sharing, I suppose. And I don't know if anyone's seen, there was a really interesting article, it's a piece of research actually, but I think it's in the Railway Gazette today, talking about how the kind of impact of this virus and the kind of overlaid with people's kind of much more heightened sort of interest and understanding of climate change, and how actually that they are predicting in I think the research is, I haven't read it all actually because it only came out this morning, but it came from sort of Europe and China, and how actually that is very likely to lead to people using aviation far less and moving to a switch to high-speed rail. Obviously, I was reading it quite with a lot of interest because I work, a head of ops for a high-speed rail group, so it's of great interest to us, that kind of thing, because obviously, you know, pipelines of work in this kind of current situation are, you know, going to be pretty important. But also it's interesting, isn't it, that there'll be kind of winners and losers, I suppose. You know, your presentation was all about the aviation industry, and, you know, there's potential for quite a significant shift in the way people use transport in the future, I think. And that's, as I said, not just because of the virus, but also because of because, you know, people's kind of concerns about climate change and all of the, you know, various governments' commitments to net zero targets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I absolutely agree. I think now is the time to take stock of where we are, and I think we've been forced to be locked down. But actually, personally, I am starting to evaluate where I am and the kind of the direction of travel I've been taking, and what's important to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Can I bring in Julian, because he sort of like was bringing up something on how do you promote innovation?
Yeah, just thinking really in terms of Richard Branson being a well-known innovator and disruptor, and I think you're right to say that innovation, the leaders have to set the innovation culture of the organisation. But it'd be interesting your thoughts about how you actually drive or encourage more of an innovative culture in taking rail. It can be viewed as quite a staid environment in some cases.
Yeah, that's a tricky rail is, yeah, you're absolutely right. And my time at HS2, so 3.5 years, I think, as customer experience, head of customer experience, I was trying to drive a change in kind of thinking around the customer and putting the customer at the heart of the decision making as early on as possible. In particular, in a big infrastructure project, that's quite challenging. But I think it wasn't just to give an example as well around Virgin Atlantic. Richard Branson was he was the kind of the guy that you see on TV, the main kind of the ambassador, but it was actually the guy below him, the CEO, Steve Ridgway, that was actually instrumental in driving a lot of this behavior. And he was actually a friend of Richard Branson's, and actually he did the transatlantic crossing with him on his boat. So they were good friends, but he within him, and then within his kind of executive team, there was this kind of belief that actually that you can innovate and you can do these things, and that just basically by natural osmosis translated through the organization. And there was this, and I always use this term that when I worked at Virgin Atlantic, when I left, I felt like I was a stick of rock from the point I had Virgin Atlantic written throughout me. And maybe some people would say that was brainwashing, but it was actually because there was this innate belief in everybody, and people owned the brand and they cared about it. And I think the problem with the rail industry at the moment in some cases is that it's difficult to understand the brand. The strength of the brand is not always there. And I think that the complexity with rail as well is that the customers don't actually, because of the way that the franchise agreement is set up, you've got Network Rail and you've got the TOCs, and nobody quite knows. Everybody puts the pressure on the TOC, but actually it could be somebody else's fault for the situation. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Julian, but I think it just has to, it is about, I think slowly but surely, if the person at the top is continually talking about it and championing it, I think it does filter through. And I know that's difficult within rail because there's so many different components to rail. And there is not one owner. It was very different with Virgin Atlantic because it was just one brand, whereas the rail industry is a multitude, a patchwork quilt of different entities. So there is an issue, I think, but it has to come from the top, and where that lies within each organisation, obviously that needs to be decided by the companies in question.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I think probably also in rail, the safety culture sometimes gets in the way of innovation because people take a view that we can't do that because of the safety risk, when in some cases it may be more of a business risk rather than an operational or passenger safety risk.
You're absolutely right, but just to come back, I think aviation, that was at the forefront of everybody's mind as well. The security risk was massive, and we were still able to the seat that I kind of designed. That was the first time you had this kind of asymmetric herringbone layout because it was very complex to certify. But because of the belief that they needed a new seat, that overrode everything else. And actually, but we never actually deviated from the security and safety. We still had to certify that seat 16G to get it on the aircraft. So I think there is a way. If there's a will, there's a way.
Can I bring in, I'm going to say Sula Free because I can't remember your name, I'm sorry, into the conversation, because he's been working on Hyperloop and has been commenting on the innovation. I think that would be and just following on from Deb's comments as well with high-speed rail. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I was just saying, one of the primary concerns I've got within the rail industry is we're slow to innovate. Having worked in multiple industries from automotive to aero to utilities, they try to innovate and find new ways of dealing with new technologies. We've taken a back seat in a certain degree. So my involvement with Hyperloop over the last year and a half have actually been focusing on designing a product based around passengers. What are the passengers' needs, what they're looking for. We're doing an end-to-end design not from when you enter the station, but actually from when you're booking your tickets.
Yeah.
So we have a host of projects kicked off over the last several years, looking at how to bring innovation, new technologies, apps, all sorts of stuff to make passengers' lives easier.
Yes.
It's a huge project. I mean, one of the things about Hyperloop that I like so much, it's a blank sheet of paper. Yeah, we're in a position to design the ideal transport mode, and even look at new technology. So that gives us the opportunity, because there's no infrastructure there already. It's a lot easier to do that rather than do that in rail when we've got to deal with TOCs, we've got to deal with the current infrastructure, with Network Rail, with other government bodies. So I do think we need to be more braver and look at how to innovate in the rail industry and push those boundaries.
Do you think then that that this is going to accelerate the implementation of Hyperloop?
Funny you mention that. So I was talking to my team just the other day. Personally, I think with the current economic crisis that we have, I think Hyperloop will probably slow down because the cost involved in developing Hyperloop is immense. I think we've got to take a step back and look at the essentials. And I don't really think Hyperloop covers that right now. Do I think? I mean, someone quoted at one stage to implement Hyperloop in the UK, it would cost around 50 to 55 billion pounds in the UK. Now, that's a nice to have project, not a necessity. So, from my position, from what I'm seeing, I see a lot of the development slowing down just because the funds aren't available.
I think that I can just jump in. The number you just quoted sort of is less than HS2 funding.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, agreed. But that's a fantastic point. But I mean, do we have that amount of money to spend right now? Especially if you look at the urgent need we have for pushing up the NHS. Are we in a position in the UK to invest so much money in a nice to have rather than building up the infrastructure that we need? And from a personal point of view, I just don't see how we can justify it. That's just a personal opinion. I mean, I know other countries around the world are in a better position and they're pushing forward, but we've got to look at the key infrastructure in the UK and see where we should invest our money and how we can actually innovate what we've got and push that forward.
Deb, what's your view on high-speed rail versus Hyperloop?
I'm not convinced about the business case for Hyperloop, to be honest. I mean, obviously one could suggest that the business case with passenger numbers as they are now might not stack up for any of these projects, but in the business case that exists for HS2, I can't see that stacking up for Hyperloop. So I mean, but having said that, I mean, what I was interested in was the you're talking about rail being slow to innovate, which is, I hear that a lot, and I just wondered, what makes that the case? What is it? What is it about the rail sector that means that things move more slowly than they do in other sectors? that is, I know that's, I suppose, to some extent the $1 million question, but I mean, this is, you know, if we're all suggesting that now is the time to start to think about how we do things differently, what are perhaps the 2 or 3 things that we would have to do differently to make that not the case, and make the rail sector be a sector that can be much more quick and braver about what they want to do to innovate?
If I could just jump in here, having spent 3 years on digital rail, and obviously digital rail is trying to innovate the signalling systems for the railways, I think part of the problem is we have a reluctance to bring in new talent or outside skills. One of the frustrations I had was we were talking to engineers about designing a digital solution when they're great at designing stations and platforms and the engineering side, and when it comes to data, that's when they sort of struggle. I think that we don't look at the next generation of engineers that can drive us forward. We're too busy looking backwards. That's just been my experience, you know, last 3-4 years on digital rail.
I think one of the fundamental challenges the rail industry has is that there is the current structure with Network Rail means that there's almost a complete lack of focus on the passengers. It's almost like the expenditure is within the engineering section rather than, I mean, if we take Nik's example of Virgin, Virgin is well known for being completely focused on the passenger experience, and I think that is what's lacking in the rail industry.
Has anyone felt that with the change in chief executive over the last 18 months that Network Rail is now concentrating more on the passenger experience, or do you think it's still too early to tell?
I think without a fundamental change in the infrastructure, the sort of the way Network Rail and the TOCs are related, I think it's a huge problem to try and solve. Let me put it like that.
I just want to bring in Andy Houghton because he's made a comment about assets and innovation with technology, and also about that customer experience. What are your thoughts, Andy?
It was always a challenge with it when I was within the industry in TOC side, that and remove the word innovation, use the word change, because essentially that's what we're talking about, isn't it? It's a change to the way that things happen. And my old team, we always used to say that we were there to give the guys on the front line the tools to do the day job, but it was up to them and working with them to make sure that they had the right tools is key. But I think the majority of the rail industry, the front-facing face of it, are the people on the front line, the station teams, the guards on trains, and drivers as well. And it's those people that are the public face of the industry. So and Dave mentioned something a few minutes ago about how it's difficult to make change in an engineering way. I'm paraphrasing here, but bringing it back to the core aspects of it, it's the customers on the front line that pay the bills, that move it along. So is rail anything more different than a customer service business that happens to run trains? And a former customer experience director of mine used to say that many times to us over the years. And I don't think it is any different. So to actually make sure that the guys on the ground feel empowered to do things that little bit differently, I think that's one of the biggest pieces of innovation that we can do, to take the shackles off the guys that are doing this day in, day out, and to engage them in the innovation conversations higher up, to get them the tools to do the day job. I know a number of the talks where there are innovation managers in place. I use Northern, LNER and TPE as examples of ones that I know, and I think Marcus at Southwest has done the same. Actually having people from the front line coming in and giving them their problem statements in order to say, this will help us do our day job better. But these are the guys on the ground that really drive change. And if they're happier because they're being listened to by their management and by the echelons going all the way up to the chief execs and the MDs and the heads of the owning group and the Andrew Haynes of the world, then to me, that's the starting point of all of this. And for all of us in the technology world, we've got these remarkable bits of software or hardware, etc. we're coming in, and granted, from a sales point of view, where I am now, it's difficult to actually get to the right person who will see the value in what you're trying to offer. And I think anybody who's in that sphere on the call would agree that there's a challenge. But it's almost like, instead of going at the top, we need to come in from the ground up, where true innovation will actually happen day in, day out.
I think that's interesting, and I think Adam Steve's just come in with a comment. Nick, do you want to comment maybe on how Virgin involved frontline teams in your innovation?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good comment by Andy, and just to pick up on that point, what we used to do is actually the work that I've just shown you, the cabin environment, which I kind of used to lead the team on. It was all about actually the cabin crew and the staff. They were the walking, talking brand, and you could have all of these ancillary items around it, but actually, fundamentally, you needed to empower the crew themselves to deliver, or the staff who were dealing with the customer to actually deliver the brand. And that's why the way that we would develop the whole idea was an end-to-end journey, as we talked about previously, and thinking about that interaction and how the actual environment created almost this canvas for the crew to paint the customer experience upon. And that's why they weren't robots, they weren't scripted. Some airlines you travel with, there's a very hard line about what you can and cannot say, and I've got so many, don't get me wrong, Virgin got stuff wrong as well. But by the nature of it, I believe they were much more human, because they were allowed freedom and they were empowered, and also because the uniform they wore, they were proud to wear it, and that came back to live and eat and breathe it coming from the top. When people, it was quite the organization wasn't layers and layers and layers. You could walk around the organization, and the crew could actually talk to the CEO in the canteen, have just a normal conversation with him, and actually tell them about things that were going on, and things would get sorted. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. And I think that it was the culture within the company itself led to a good delivery of that service. But equally, people did feel empowered because of that, because they felt like they were part of the family.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question? Sorry.
I just wanted to bring in Juliana, because Juliana's made a really good point when we're in terms of Andy saying about a service, because we've spoken a lot about mobility as a service, but where is that now?
It's whatever we call it, isn't it? I think mobility as a service, if you look at all these hyped tech trends of certain years and you see things rise and fall, I think it's just how we're going to think about ourselves. I think it's a useful term to think that, we are delivering a service. We're not, it doesn't need to be bits of kit. It just needs to be what is the service? The service is for the passenger or the freight customer, something like that. So I think it's still a useful way of reframing our thinking. And also, when we talk about rail as a service, we don't think of ourselves in isolation. We think of the mobility as a joined up journey, so that, there's one of my favorite statistics, which is super grim, especially as a railway engineer, but that rail only makes up 2 to 3% of journeys in the whole country every day, right? So there's a lot of market share that we're leaving on the table. And there's a lot of ways that we're not relevant using a network that was designed 200 years ago or 150 years ago, these sorts of things. So there is everything to play for. There is everything, we could do in infrastructure, as well as service, operating models, commercial models. Some of these are quite restricted, though COVID might shake them up. But I think it's just useful to keep thinking of that service. As they've said, it's about the people who are delivering, about people's systems, the way you run your business, the way you have your culture, and soft stuff that people love to dismiss. And rail engineering is all about that. We love bits of kit and crayons and things, but it's not helpful. And it's as people have pointed out, network rail is structured to say, yeah, we're all about engineering. And it's okay. It's time for a different narrative. 2 to 3% of journeys a day. Whoop-de-doo. We've got nothing, and we're making ourselves irrelevant.
Do you think that's a greater challenge then, given the COVID-19 crisis, in the fact that people will move away from public transport when we start getting back to some sort of normality? Or can engineers offer some sort of solution to that?
Yeah, because engineers are already creative thinkers and they have all the tools to learn new things, I think this is our opportunity to regroup. You know, if we were really smart, we would see Network Rail come out with a whole comms campaign and the DFT come out with a whole comms campaign off the back of this, saying, well, hang on, we still need to accomplish carbon targets. That's our biggest buzzword. That's something everyone can understand and is broadly behind now. What are the tools in our toolbox? Rail is absolutely one of those most important tools. So, you know, it's about promoting, it's about joining up with other transport, joining housing and land use with railways, right? Just getting outside of our bubble and having that innovation about how we deliver, you know, deliver an actual service or what we do as a function, as a profession, and really changing that, making it relevant for people so that we come out on top when people are ready to come back to standardized economic movements and maybe even change their behaviors.
I think that's great, and I just want to bring in a couple of other people on that, because I've got Mill Williams talking about, you know, how we do procurement, and then a couple of people have come in earlier, Craig Sapio, about using innovation allowances, and also got Chris Jones as well, who's talking about limitations of private sector, of government funding to lead innovation. So what are your thoughts on that?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been through a couple of procurement processes. One of them was with DASA, which is quite a heavy process, the Defence Accelerator. I also worked with Merseyrail as customer services on stations and platforms and so forth in September, October 2019, and then in 2020 early on, whilst we were still allowed to go out. So I've seen it from the point of view of somebody trying to supply, and I've seen it from the point of view of the guys, the women and men, all genders, on station working and having ideas and not getting their ideas through. And I think that's a really important thing. Nik's presentation on everybody owning things, that everybody, if it actually gets to the point where it's not just the workforces, but it's also the customers who express affection and a desire to communicate their ideas to the company voluntarily. If you can actually get to that point, then everybody, workforces, C-suite, suppliers, and customers, that's a sweet point that would help every single process. But I think we really do need to get to the point where procurement is a question of identifying problems before bringing in solutions that are looking for problems. I honestly think that would improve things dramatically.
So, Chris Jones, what do you think of a different way of procuring the stuff that we need to buy? So we're emotionalizing, I guess, what it is we want to buy. So we're not going straight to the solution and stuff.
It would on mute again. Here we are. So my point, it's more about, it goes back to the conversation about the way in which rail lags behind the rest of technology and the rest of all other industries and the way they innovate. And it comes down to the fact that rail is inherently very expensive, and the comparison was drawn at the cost of HS2 versus potentially implementing Hyperloop. The point is, HS2 is a tried and tested technology. We've been using it since the Victorian times. Whether or not you agree it's right that we continue to implement Victorian railways is another separate argument. But there's no private companies out there who have the capital or the ability to finance at a scale that you could implement HS2 as a national network, Hyperloop as a national network, because of the cost of it. So therefore, you're going to need some form of government backing or some form of government finance. As government, if I was to implement HS2, as they are, you can spend taxpayers' money on forwarding that. Whereas if I was to say to, not to us, because we understand transport in this arena, we understand railways. If you'd say to the average taxpayer, I'm going to spend 50 billion of your hard-earned money on trying out technology, I don't know if it's going to work. So for me, that is why I think that innovation on that scale doesn't happen. What I think we need is like what Elon Musk was doing, where he's trying out his system on a very small scale, but proving it does work, and then it will grow larger and larger. But the fact is, when things cost as much as they do on a national scale, particularly railways, I think we are always going to lag behind.
And of course, Elon's doing that with billions of pounds as well. But I just want to bring in, as unfortunately our last speaker, Craig Sapio, who has mentioned about the energy industry and network innovation, could that be a solution to our funding issues?
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. So it's really interesting to hear some of the points that are being raised. So as I say, almost as an outsider, we're a company working within the energy industry, talking about the government support and the funding requirements. That's exactly what the energy industry had experienced. So in 2011, there was a big push by Ofgem to say to the energy distribution companies, look, you're not doing enough innovation, and innovation is a way to save customers money and improve the energy experience that they're getting, the service you're providing. So we need you to innovate, and Ofgem had to essentially step in because the companies were very much taking the approach of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So to Nik's kind of comment at the very start of this and Richard Branson's approach, Ofgem almost needed to step in and say, look, you need to innovate here. And essentially they did a price control. So effectively ourselves as customers, the amount that we pay to our energy retailers is a little bit taken off the top of that. It's obviously to ensure the infrastructure for distributing electricity and gas is maintained and works. And Ofgem said, right, distribution companies, you're not going to get this little section off the top unless you actually innovate and use that money towards innovation projects. So they did get the point that sometimes it's difficult for the companies themselves to justify the spend, and so they need something that they can actually use to actually procure innovation and move it forward. So yeah, that was the approach the energy industry took, and it's interesting to hear that it seems to be the general consensus across here that maybe something like that needs to happen within the rail industry as well, just given the number of parties involved.
That is really insightful, and I think unfortunately we have reached the end of our time. I hope you have all enjoyed it. I want to say thank you to Nik for joining us today and being our speaker. But also, I think two things that I've personally taken away is, apart from that, now is the time to innovate. Listening to Juliana, is that we need to be thinking about what the future of rail is and how we do regroup, and actually it's not just about rail, it's about that wider system, and still continuing our carbon targets are still going to be needed at the end of it. So again, once again, thank you. I was supposed to ask if anybody needed anything at the end of it, but if you can either email myself or Liam, you can contact us through the Rail Innovation Group on LinkedIn, or you can email us directly. And we do have another webinar planned for a week Friday, but I've got no idea what the date is because, like everybody else, I'm losing all semblance of time. So, but we do plan to have all of these weekly, and please keep up the conversation. Thank you.